It was getting late. Diane didn't know how late, but it was too damn late for anyone to be calling. She hoped it was Marty's phone and not hers. Either way, she just covered her face with a pillow and gave thanks when the ringing stopped after the fifth. And she was just getting comfortable when the ringing sounded again. Damn it! She shouted, opening her eyes again. Martin, answer your damn! The words were suddenly cut short as she realized her husband wasn't beside her in bed. She glanced at the clock, 3:37, picked up her phone from the nightstand, and wondered why her husband wasn't in bed. After all, he had been there when they went to bed hours ago. Yes, hello, she muttered into the receiver. Is this Diana Miller? Yes, it's her. Who is this? Are you Martin Miller's wife? Yes, for God's sake, yes. Who is this? Mrs. Miller, this is the emergency room at North City Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago, and we still have your contact information from an incident a year ago. He was in a car accident. Could you come over right away? Oh my God, is he okay? No. I'm not at liberty to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am. Would you please come over? Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can. She ran upstairs where her daughter slept. Dallas, named after the city in which she was conceived, attended the local university but lived at home to save money. During her freshman year, she liked living in the dorms, but during her sophomore year, she decided that living near campus would not be conducive to her studies. Dal, wake up! Nothing. Dally, wake up! This time, she was lightly nudged in the shoulder. Still nothing. Dallas, wake up! Dallas sat up straight in bed and tried to focus her blurred eyes. There was a light on in the room. It was a short night. Dallas, your father was in an accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We need to go. Once dressed, both women drove to the hospital as fast as they thought was safe. Dallas began inundating her mother with questions about what had happened, but Diane couldn't give any more information than she had already told her. It seemed like an eternity to them, but given the lack of traffic at this time of night and morning, the drive only took about 10 minutes. There was an empty space near the entrance, and Diana had parked the car at a slight angle, but it didn't bother her in the slightest as they jumped out of the car and headed inside. They were led to Martin's room in the emergency room, and they were shocked at his condition. He was well bandaged and clearly unconscious. They were given forms to fill out. Grief doesn't exempt you from paperwork. Dallas moved her chair to be closer to her father. They stayed there for about an hour before a man and woman in police uniforms entered the room. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were first on the scene of your husband's accident. Any word on his well-being? No one has told us anything, officer, Diane replied. Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you some questions. I realize the timing isn't right, but it's best to do it as soon as possible. Of course. Do you know what your husband was doing at this time of night? That's the thing. He was home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't even know he wasn't home until the hospital called. Ma'am, Officer Stanton turned to Dallas. Can you confirm that? Actually, I can. We were watching a movie on TV that ended at 10, and then we all went to bed. I saw Dad go into Mom's bedroom. What movie? The officer asked. Something with Keanu Reeves in it. Some kind of action movie. Dad picked it out. It was his turn. Did you have any particular problems? Financial problems, maybe? Or marital ones? Nothing that all married couples don't face. No special problems, no. I just don't understand why he went out without my knowledge. Were the people in the other car hurt? That's just the thing, Mrs. Miller. It was a one-car accident. According to both witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally and then accelerated rather suddenly and slammed right into the big oak tree that stands on the corner of Highway 121 and 288. There were no skid marks, and no one remembers seeing any brake lights. Diane and Dallas looked at the officers when it came to them what they were implying. Are you implying that my husband did this on purpose? That he tried to kill himself? We have yet to inspect the car for possible mechanical problems. And of course, we'll need to talk to your husband when he wakes up. But we are considering that possibility as well. Are you sure there were no problems that you can think of? Officers, I love my husband very much, and we have a wonderful marriage. No, I don't see any problems. I'm sure he just lost control of himself or dozed off. It was very late. I'm sure there are reasonable. Diana burst into tears and couldn't finish the sentence. Officer Stanton put one of her cards on the table, asking them to call if they remembered anything else, and walked out of the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room for privacy. You didn't tell them. No, Dallas, I didn't, Mom replied as her tears subsided. It's none of their business and has nothing to do with it. Your father was fine with it. If he was, he'll say something when they talk to him. Then we'll cross that bridge. The next few days passed slowly for everyone. Martin was still unconscious. He had been admitted to the hospital, and Diana and Dallas spent as much time there as they could. They were often there together, but made sure he was never alone. Fortunately, Diane knew Martin's boss and had called him to let him know what had happened and that he would be away from work. She carefully avoided saying anything that might lead anyone to think that it might have been an attempt on his own life. The accident had occurred on Saturday night, and on Wednesday morning Martin began to regain consciousness. By noon, his eyes were open, although because of all the medical equipment, he could not do much more than look around. Diane was nearby and noticed this, walking over to his bedside and reassuring him that everything was going to be okay. A few seconds later, a nurse entered the room hurriedly, something on the monitors alerting her that the patient was awake. Diana returned to her seat to give the nurse a chance to do her job. Soon another medical staff entered the room to check on Martin's condition. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Diane went outside and called Dallas to let him know that her father was awake. Dallas didn't answer, so she left a voicemail. Soon most of the medical paraphernalia was removed. Martin's left arm was broken, but he was right-handed and didn't expect it to hinder him much. His throat was sore from the tube, so he was given a whiteboard so he could communicate. The nurse read the message and asked if he was sure. Martin nodded his head. The nurse quickly went out into the hallway as the tests continued. Mrs. Miller, I need to inform you that your husband has asked that you not be allowed in his room, and your daughter as well. What? He's my husband. I have a right to be with him. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes come first. Let me just talk to him and we'll work it out. Diana tried to step around the nurse but was never able to get any closer, so she resorted to yelling. Martin, 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 please talk to me. What's going on? Martin, Martin! Mrs. Miller, please stop yelling. You're disturbing our other patients. You can wait outside the room if you want, but if we catch you trying to enter the room or making a ruckus, we will escort you out of the building. Do I understand? Yes, you're free to go, replied Diana, who had no choice but to do otherwise. 45 minutes later, Dallas finally made it to the hospital. She found her mother sitting in a chair at the entrance to the room. Mom, why are you here? Your father forbade us from being in the room. Both of us. I mean, I understand why he forbade you, but why me? What the hell does that mean? And why did it take you so long to get here? I had just woken up when Bradley came by to see how I was doing. We kind of... Geez. You were having fun with your boyfriend instead of coming to see your father? I'm sorry, Mom, but he was still unconscious when I left, Dallas replied, in a tone that indicated she wasn't sorry. It was really stressful, and I needed to relieve the stress. It worked out great for what it's worth. When you get a chance, give me a call. No, Dallas, I'm not going to do that. And let's not talk about it now. It's disrespectful. The irony made Dallas grin. Next chapter. There was a knock on the door, and a tall, very attractive brunette walked in. She was dressed professionally, but not like a doctor, although her badge gave her away as an employee. Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been 9 days since the accident. He has regained the ability to speak, The whiteboard is a thing of the past. He'd asked when he might be discharged, but never got a clear answer. Until now. The hospital has asked me to spend some time with you. Is that okay with you? Do I have a choice? Not if you want to go home soon. I have to give you permission to be discharged, the psychiatrist replied, a puzzled smile on her face. Then let's get started. Dr. Lassiter pulled one of the chairs over to the bed and sat down, crossing her long legs. She took a few moments to review the folder she carried in her hands. So, you were brought in a little over a week ago after an accident in which you collided with a large tree. I also see that you have forbidden your wife and daughter from visiting you, and I suspect that these things are somehow connected. Connected, Martin replied. She has been unfaithful to me. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon these days, though it rarely leads to such a reaction. Maybe there's something else? Martin was silent for several minutes. He didn't really feel like talking about it, especially not with a pretty female doctor. He wondered if they had some old man he could talk to. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently. It wasn't the first time she had had to wait for someone to gather their thoughts to start talking. Her patience was rewarded. I've been suffering from depression, I guess. Nothing that could be diagnosed. It's just, like I said, I was depressed. About anything in particular or just in general? I couldn't do this. For a little over a year. Since the previous accident, right? Of course she knew. She probably had his entire medical history in her hands. She just wanted to get him to say it. Right. It wasn't even a terrible accident. I was in the back seat, my boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We got hit from behind. There were no airbags or even very severe damage, but I wasn't prepared for it. I got whiplash and hit my head on the seat in front of me. I guess that's what caused the accident. The report says you had a mild concussion and whiplash, the doctor interjected. My doctors couldn't explain that. None of the ED medication helped one bit. They ran a bunch of tests, some more than once, and the best explanation I got was that something happened, and part of my brain was damaged. So you couldn't do it, resulting in your wife becoming dissatisfied with your sex life, which in turn led to her getting a lover. This eventually wore you down and led to the events of that evening. Roughly? In a nutshell, yes. And how long was it before your wife decided to take that step? 7 or 8 months, I think. I'm just a little uneasy about it. Anyway, everything was fine at first, but we were still hoping that my ability would come back. We talked about staying in bed all weekend, having a really good time. That, of course, never happened. Eventually, it dragged on so long that she decided to fulfill her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss this with you beforehand? No. I found out about it when I got home from work early. A hackneyed cliché, I know. What did you do? What could I have done? She was right when she said I couldn't do things. It wasn't her fault that I couldn't handle things, so she did what she had to do. And if, hypothetically, she had asked you beforehand, would you have agreed? You know, I've thought about it a lot, and part of me wants to say that I would have said yes because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But I don't think I would have accepted it. We made vows, we made promises, and one of them was in sickness and in health. I wouldn't do that to her, so I couldn't be okay with her doing that to me. Obviously, she continued to see him. Obviously. And now that I knew about it, she became less restrained. I don't know if she started doing it more often, since I don't know how often they used to do it, but whereas before it was limited to during the day while I was at work, now there were weekend trips to the store, and some of that time she was obviously spending with Bill. That must have been difficult. Difficult isn't even something that can be described. But then again, I didn't think there was anything I could do. She deserved a sex life and I couldn't provide it, but the whole thing was killing me. Tell me about the night of the accident. We were watching a movie on TV as a family. We still had those nights, those moments. I kept my pain, emotional pain, to myself. It was probably a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diane or Dallas. They kissed and hugged goodnight, and I got a good night from Dallas as she walked off in the other direction. I think it was then that I realized that she had completely lost respect for me as a father and as a man. I could hardly blame her for that, for I had no respect for myself either. I got ready for bed as usual. Diana did the same. It was the same as always. Every night, the same thing. I waited until Diane was asleep. Then I got dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys. I went upstairs and peeked into Dallas's room. She was asleep too. I kissed her and said goodbye. I went and got in my car. I knew it had airbags, but I figured if I hit hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan. I was just driving around. I knew of a large oak tree, but it wasn't my immediate target. After driving past it the first time, I realized there were no obstacles there and I could drive up pretty straight. I drove by it again and headed straight for it. For several minutes, they sat in silence, letting the story digest in their brains. Finally, the doctor spoke. Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for being so open and honest with me today. That's a great rarity. I'm going to let you get some rest and take some time to process what you've told me. Is it okay if I come back tomorrow? I'm not going anywhere, he replied. They shook hands and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin picked up his cell phone, which he had left at home that evening, and which Diane had brought him before he had forbidden her, and answered several messages and emails, including messages from his boss. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Back at home, Diane tried to keep her cool. She was under the impression that Marty was okay with her relationship with Bill, that he had given her a gift because he loved her very much. Even when she had first heard about the accident, she no longer believed it was an accident. She had been sure he had nothing to do with it, but now she wasn't so sure anymore. She suspected that the police had spoken to her husband, but she hoped he hadn't said anything about her relationship with Bill. The police never contacted her again, technically not considered a crime. Case closed. Still, he never really objected, did he? If he had, she didn't remember it. And besides, she wasn't going to live in celibacy just because some idiot decided to finish off her husband's boss. That wasn't what she'd signed up for, and she wasn't going to settle for that now. When Marty got home, she would try to be more considerate of his feelings, more reserved with Bill, but there was no way she was going to give it up. Next chapter. The next morning, Dr. Lassiter came in as promised. She walked the same way, took one of the inconspicuous sturdy chairs, of which there were 2 in each room, and sat down. Marty watched her with interest. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller? Not much changed from yesterday, Doc. Ready to go home, but I guess that's up to you. Partially, yes, but by state law, you've been detained for 72 hours, and technically that didn't start until you and I started talking yesterday. So, 2 more days at least. That's fine, Doc. At least the food here isn't too bad. It's always bad, they picked up together, sharing a hearty laugh. Old but kind, Dr. Lassiter remarked. But I'm glad you're joking. So am I. It's been a while, and by a while I mean months. I haven't felt like, well, myself. I used to be a pretty good joker to the point where I sometimes got on Dallas's nerves. We didn't have bad thoughts anymore? We didn't go down dark alleys in our minds anymore? You know, Doc, no. I spent a year pretty depressed, and the last few months I've been really depressed. I don't feel that way anymore. It's been replaced by anger, frustration, annoyance, by Diane and Dallas, more Diane, of course, but mostly by myself, for failing to stand up for myself, to let my wife know that what she was doing was unacceptable. And now you intend to stand up for yourself? Absolutely. While I admit I'm tempted to just file for divorce, I have to take some of the blame for letting her overstep her bounds. But if she's willing to stop seeing Bill, then I'm willing to go to a counselor and try to repair our marriage. I can appreciate your determination, Mr. Miller. I rarely see such a quick turnaround. I had plenty of time to think as I lay here before you came in. I am grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to voice them, to tell someone. It allowed me to focus my thoughts. Excellent, Mr. Miller. Just excellent. In that case, I won't be late today. I have a few more patients than yesterday, so I can use that time. I'll stop by tomorrow for one last chat with you. but I don't see any reason why you won't be able to leave on schedule. Looking forward to it, Doc. Diana and Dallas were there to pick him up when he was free. If he was going to try to get things back on track, he had to start by acting like things were going to be restored. There was still healing to be done. The airbags had been surprisingly effective, far more effective than Marty had anticipated. Worst of all was the concussion he had received, which had caused him to spend a lot of time resting and relaxing in the dark. The TV was off, and gentle music was playing in the background. His wife and daughter were caressing him. All was well for a little over a week until Diane announced that she needed to go shopping. "No," Marty said calmly. "What?" replied Diane, perplexed. "Marty, there are things we need, including some of your healing creams." "Make a list for Dallas. She can go." "Why are you dragging me into this, Dad? Besides, I have plans to meet Bradley." "Then you'll have an incentive to finish shopping sooner, won't you?" "Diane, the list." "This is ridiculous, Martin. You can't just come home and turn our routine upside down. Dallas has his own plans, and I'm going to the store, and that's final." "Do you think I'm stupid, Diane?" "Stupid? No, Marty, of course not. Why would you ask such a thing?" "You think I don't realize that these shopping trips are an excuse to visit Bill?" "I've never come home with groceries, Martin. Not once." "Yes, and it's a great cover. But you've been away too long, and not only that, but I can see it in you. By your eyes when you won't look at me. By your clothes when they don't look quite right. By your makeup, which is always a little messed up. At least some of the time you spend with Bill, and that's gone." The shock in Diane's eyes was obvious, and Dallas suddenly felt a little more respect for her father. "Marty, please, we've been over this before. I'll do my best to be more careful now. Obviously, I've gotten too relaxed with my meetings, but I'm definitely not giving up on him." "So our vows mean nothing? Renounce all others? In sickness and in health?" "Well, that's about sickness, and you don't give up the others. But you will do so, starting today. You're going to stop seeing Bill, and we're going to see a therapist to repair our marriage. Or you won't do it, and we won't do it, and I'll call a divorce lawyer on Monday." "You're not going to do any of that, Martin Miller. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could do this with you and only you, I would. But I can't. And it's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. I wasn't even there. Suddenly, because I had nothing to do with it, my sex life is gone, and I'm supposed to just accept it? It's not going to work. So I'm going shopping, I'm going to Bill's, and I'm going to get my needs met. If you want to talk more about this tonight, we can do that. But don't you dare think you can dictate to me what I can and can't do." Without waiting for another word from her husband, Diana walked out the door, closing it with a clatter. The silence was deafening. Father and daughter looked at each other, and then Marty retired to his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller worried about the future of her family, her parents' marriage. Her father had never stood up to her mother, but nothing so serious had ever come between them. But deciding that it was between them and there was nothing she could do about it, she cleaned herself up and went to meet Bradley. Next chapter. "Damn it, Dal, what's the matter?" asked Bradley disappointedly. "I'm sorry, Bradley. I'm just worried about my folks and I can't stay in this mood." "Come on, baby, let's have some fun. It'll take your mind off them." "Jesus, Bradley, haven't you ever thought about anything else? Hell, we don't do anything else but have fun. How about taking me out on a date to distract yourself? How about bowling or dinner or miniature golf or anything else besides what we're doing?" "That's fun and enjoyable, and I don't like bowling or miniature golf, so why the hell should I take you there?" replied Bradley. A light finally went on in Dallas's head. "You're right, you wouldn't, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm going home, and it's over between us. Find someone else to do nothing with." Dallas walked out of Bradley's bedroom one last time, ignoring his pleading, "Dal, let's go." Bradley was a good-looking guy, but she suddenly realized he was too young. He had no ambition or desire to develop their relationship. He was just trying to finish college so he could get a job at his father's company, and she doubted he could do anything more there than get a paycheck and a position. Suddenly, the front door slammed. Damn that boy. How many times did I have to tell him not to slam the damn door? Bill said irritably. Relieved, Diane realized that she didn't like Bill, and she didn't really like him at all. And Bradley was a lazy slob. Next chapter. When Dallas returned to the family home, it was getting dark outside. She found her father resting in his bedroom. A faint light was coming from the bathroom, where the light was on and the door was ajar. She realized her father wanted some light, but none of the lights in the room burned that low. Dad. He stood with his back to her and didn't turn around, but he answered nonetheless. Dallas. I'm sorry. That got his attention, so he carefully sat up in bed and turned to see his daughter crying in the doorway. For what? He'd stopped calling her affectionate words when he'd found out she'd helped her mother find a lover, and he hesitated to do so now, even though she was crying. He couldn't help but think it was just as much of a setup. Dallas stepped closer until she was at the foot of the bed. I'm sorry for what I did. I was just trying to help my mom, you know. She was so upset about what you were going through, and the fact that you couldn't. Their eyes met for a moment. Well, you know you couldn't. And Bradley's father went through the same thing after Mrs. Coyle died. Bradley says his father talks all the time about how much he misses her, especially the closeness. I thought they could take care of each other. I'm sorry, but I never thought about how it would affect you. So, is that why you, did what you did that night? Marty was surprised at such an unexpected revelation from his daughter. It might still be a hoax, but he had to take her confession at face value. If he'd been fooled, hurt, deceived again, then so be it. Mostly, I guess. I was still pretty depressed anyway, just because I couldn't, what I couldn't. Father and daughter met gazes again, this time exchanging a brief smile. But it's over now, Dally. I won't do it again. I hope you won't. I still need you. Are you going to divorce your mom? I haven't made a final decision yet, honey, but I don't see any other way out unless she stops seeing Bill. But keep it to yourself. She has to change because she wants to, not because she's forced to. Okay, Dad. I'll go upstairs. Oh, did I break up with Bradley today? Marty tried to hold back a smile. He'd never particularly liked the guy, but it surprised him because she seemed to be in love with him, or had been once upon a time. Why? Marty asked, surprised at this turn of events. Because, Dallas began, and then paused to think. Because my dad once told me he wasn't good enough for me. And I finally realized he was right. I finally realized that my dad was right about a lot of things. A smile appeared on Marty's lips as he realized that his girl had grown up a lot today. Dallas walked over to her father and hugged him, realizing that it was the first hug they'd had in a long time. Finally, they pulled away, smiled at each other, and Marty watched Dallas silently leave the room and go upstairs. No sooner had his daughter's bedroom door closed than Marty heard the chirp of Diane remotely locking her car. The good feelings that had just filled him with joy vanished in an instant. He lay down again and closed his eyes. A moment later, Diane walked into the bedroom. She was taking a shower at Bill's, and Marty decided it was best if she came back fresh, although they could both telegraph exactly what Diane had been up to. Could you help with the groceries? Is there really groceries here? Asked Marty, pulling herself up. Yes, Marty. I told you I'd get groceries, and I did. Marty dragged the bags from the car and unloaded them on the counter. He noticed that they contained no refrigerated or frozen food, all to restock the pantry. He also found the receipt, and judging by the time, she had left the grocery store almost 2 hours ago. From the looks of it, she had gone shopping first before heading out to meet Bill. Even though Marty knew she would, the evidence lying in front of him still hurt. After putting his things away, Marty wordlessly made his way to the bedroom to lie down. He wondered if it was even worth bringing it up again. There was really no point. Diane had made it clear what she intended to do, so the next question was his reaction. Something had to change. Did you want to talk some more? his wife asked in a tone that said it wouldn't do any good. No, Diana, you've made your position clear. Diana's face and tone softened. She loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. He was still her best friend and the person she most enjoyed spending time with. She didn't think her own satisfaction should be an issue under the circumstances, and she hoped Marty would eventually feel the same way. Are you hungry? She asked, distracting him from his musings. No, I made fettuccine while you were gone. I hope you had a salad? You haven't been very good with vegetables lately. No, there was no salad, but I made spinach. Diana nodded approvingly and headed to the closet to get dressed. She had thought about getting back to intimacy with her husband, something she missed so much, but today was not the occasion. By the time she'd changed clothes, Marty was already asleep, or at least pretending to be very well. Next chapter. The divorce didn't go smoothly. Diane was furious when she was handed the papers. Marty had been kind enough to send them to the house and didn't fail to point out that he was out with Dallas at the time, having moved into the guest room, which was upstairs next to Dallas's room. Diane fought hard against the divorce. She hired a very aggressive attorney, and he made every effort. They even tried to have him declared mentally incompetent, citing a suicide attempt. Marty, anticipating that she would try something like that, and because he thought it was a good idea, went to a psychologist the same week he was served with the papers. The psychologist he went to was highly respected and certainly not cheap. And when he testified that Marty was definitely no longer a suicide risk, the judge agreed and the matter dropped. The argument could have gone on for a long time, but just when it looked like Diane was ready to put her feet up, Dallas intervened. She let her mother know that they were wrong, that Diana's needs did not outweigh the vows and promises she had made. Life wasn't always fair, and she had to support her husband and suffer by his side. Dallas also made it clear that any further resistance would damage their future mother-daughter relationship, possibly forever. Faced with the loss of her husband and daughter, Diane decided she had no choice and dropped her objections to the divorce. The house was sold. Marty agreed to alimony for several years, knowing that a judge would award it anyway. Diane got herself a 2-bedroom apartment near work and was able to go full-time 8 months after the divorce, but the divorce left her bitter and angry, especially when Bill let her know it was over between them. He seemed to have several other women he was having fun with, and Diane lost her attraction once she was no longer married. Dallas continued to attend school, alternating between being with both parents, though as time went on, Diane stopped playing the victim role and continued to blame Marty for the divorce. If she heard her mother say one more time, "If only he had been more understanding," she would have screamed. And Marty? Well, next chapter. Marty entered the dimly lit club around 10 p.m. It was Friday night, and he just wanted to get out of the house. He just wanted to spend some quality time. He wanted to drink and maybe dance. He had been so unlike himself lately, and he wanted to change that. He took a seat at the bar and ordered a rum and coke. As he sipped his drink, he glanced around at the customers who were with him that evening and noticed a face at the far end of the bar that seemed familiar, but he couldn't locate it. A nearly empty wine glass stood in front of her. Marty shifted his gaze to her and thought for a moment, and then he turned back. He sat on the edge of consciousness for a couple minutes, and then it hit him. A small smile appeared on his lips, and he picked up his drink, carrying it carefully as he approached the woman. She looked up at him as he approached her. "Dr. Lassiter?" She looked him in the eye and studied his face for a while, but she didn't immediately recognize him, and Marty thought he might have the wrong person. "I'm leaving Dr. Lassiter at the hospital. Here in the real world, it's Vicky. But I'm afraid you've put me at a disadvantage. It's been quite some time, and I'm sure you've interacted with far more patients than I have with excellent psychologists. I'm much better with names than faces. Try me. Martin Miller." Vicky thought about the name for a moment, and Marty waited patiently for her to admit defeat. He watched her carefully, and if you asked him later, he'd swear he saw a light bulb go on in her brain. "Ah, Mr. Miller. An unfaithful wife and a rather unexpected collision with a tree, if I'm not mistaken. You're not mistaken, and I'm amazed. We've only spoken twice in a year, heck, almost 2 years ago. It's a gift. Care to join me? Marty took a seat, signaling the bartender to fill their drinks. Thank you. My pleasure. So, what brings you here tonight? Meeting someone? Asked Marty. Trying to, Vicky replied, and the gleam in her eyes made her meaning clear. Really? I thought I remembered a rather impressive stone on your finger. Perhaps you did. It was a little before my divorce became final. I wore rings in an attempt to convince my husband, ex-husband, that he really had nothing in common with a 20-year-old cashier other than a desire to invite one of her friends into his bed. I'm afraid I didn't succeed. Oh my God. Are they still together? This may surprise you, Mr. Miller, but since the divorce, I've completely lost interest in Wayne's relationship. I don't have the slightest clue. Of course you do. That was a stupid question. And please call me Marty, Martin, or even Jerk. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Marty. All right, Martin. Would you like to take me to the dance floor? I'd love to. Martin asked the bartender to leave their drinks behind the bar, then took Vicky's hand and led her to the dance floor. It was a rousing number, and they quickly got into the rhythm. This song was followed by another fast song, and then a slower song began. All the while they stayed on the floor, and on the slow song they pulled themselves to each other. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck, and his hands pressed firmly against her back. Being a guy, Martin immediately noticed the lack of a bra. They stared into each other's eyes for a while before Vicky rested her head on his shoulder. 2 slow songs followed, and they didn't break their embrace when the second song began. Martin was immersed in the sensations of this beautiful, soft woman who smelled simply amazing. As the song faded out, Vicky took advantage of the slight lowering of the music volume to say a few words. How about you take me back to your place and do something about it? Martin took her hand and walked back to the bar, paying the bill and informing the bartender that they didn't need any more drinks. He didn't look surprised. She took an Uber to the club, they got into his car, and Martin started the drive back to the apartment he'd bought. It was small, but he appreciated that he no longer had to tend to the lawn. Vicky, maybe I'm asking a little late, but how much have you had to drink? It was my first glass of wine on the bar when you came over. Why? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women. Don't worry, Martin. And they pulled into the underground parking garage and took the elevator to his floor. As soon as the door closed, Vicky immediately said, "Then show me to your bedroom." An hour later, they were about to fall asleep, but Martin had one more question. Vicky? Do you think you're ready for another serious relationship? There was a long pause, and Martin was afraid he had made a mistake and scared her. He half expected her to get out of bed and ask for a ride home. There was no doubt in her attractiveness to him, and not just in her physical beauty. She was intelligent, and he enjoyed her company. Of course, it wasn't love yet, but she was the first woman he'd met since his divorce that he'd even considered. Why don't we talk about it in the morning? Sure. Good night, Vicky. Good night, Martin. Next chapter. Vicky woke up before Martin did. He seemed calm, so she just let him sleep. She showered and then went to the kitchen to see what she could make for breakfast. Martin's question before bed caught her off guard. Not that she wasn't attracted to him, but she was really focused on having a good time. She had been telling herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life, and to some extent that was true. She had a good job and wonderful friends, so she didn't need a man. But to be completely honest with herself, she did want one. But would a decent guy even want her after she told him the truth? Martin was awakened by the smell of something cooking. He rushed into the kitchen and found her. I was going to take you out for breakfast. It's too late. You can take me out to lunch. Go take a shower and breakfast will be ready. 10 minutes later, Martin returned to Vicky in the kitchen just as she was arranging the plates on the table. There was an omelet, a few slices of sausage, and a piece of buttered toast. I didn't realize I had sausage in there, she said. It was stashed in the freezer. I hope it's still good. Martin took a bite from one of the slices and said it tasted quite all right. Breakfast itself went relatively smoothly, and Martin took on the task of cleaning up the kitchen as Vicky had done him the courtesy of preparing the food. They chatted about nothing while everything was being prepared, and as the last plate was put away in the dishwasher, he turned to Vicky. Are you ready to talk? Ready as I've ever been. All right. Look, Vicky, I don't want to put you on the spot or pry into your business. If you're not interested in anything but fun, then so be it. You don't owe me anything. I know that. It's just that I need to tell you something, and why don't we do it in the bedroom? I'll be more comfortable there. They held hands and went into the bedroom. They sat on the bed facing each other. Martin, I know we only met last night, at least as people in the real world. I think you're a great guy and I'm definitely attracted to you, but there's something I need to tell you. I told you that my husband left me for a 20-year-old, and it's true. But that wasn't the whole story. The main reason he left me was because I couldn't have children. He wanted a family and was looking for someone to give him one. He didn't want to adopt. The fact that he didn't have children of his own, he saw as some sort of failure, and I was the reason. And no, I have no idea how he behaved after the divorce. I'm a guy in his 40s with a grown daughter. I wouldn't mind kids, but that's no reason to divorce. I'm glad to hear that. Another thing I want you to know, well, at least I want to be honest, is that I'm not too proud. After my divorce was finalized, I wasn't feeling my best. I was getting old and had just lost my husband to a woman almost half my age. I'm 37 in case you were wondering. I was wondering, but there was no way I would have asked. They both chuckled slightly. I also felt, well, inferior is probably the most appropriate word. Truth be told, I didn't feel like a woman at all. How can you be a woman and not have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's how I felt at the time. So I decided to prove that I was a woman, and if I couldn't be a woman by having children, then I was going to be a woman by satisfying men. Many of them, and mostly anonymously. I called myself Angela and wouldn't stop going home with someone when I wanted to. This went on for a few months until I realized it was self-destructive behavior and started seeing a therapist. But even then I continued to do it, though less frequently, until I finally reached a point in my life where I could stop. Isn't that what you were doing last night? Asked Martin cautiously. He wasn't judging her or wanting her to think that, but there was no doubting that she had been a cougar on the hunt last night. Yes, it was. I still have feminine needs, and I still go out occasionally to fulfill them. But whereas before I usually went out with whoever asked me out first, now I'm selective. There have been many nights when I've gone home alone and, taken care of myself. I suppose I should be glad I passed the test. You passed, Martin. You passed. I've really enjoyed spending time with you, and in answer to your question, I'd love to get to know you some more, but I'd like to be honest about what I've been through. I got tested and didn't get infected with anything, which was incredible luck. I don't need birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you need proof. If you'd like to try it, I'd like us both to be tested and agree to an exclusive relationship. For several minutes, Martin sat in silence. Vicky waited patiently, but worried whether she had given him cause for concern about a possible relationship. Finally, he seemed ready to respond. Vicky, thank you for your honesty. I know it must have been very difficult. I think I owe you the same. Our experiences are not entirely different. After my divorce, I was glad I got through it, but I still felt depressed about my inability to perform. I had no idea how I was going to find a woman, and I was facing the prospect of living all alone. I had my own therapist, and he pointed out that as women age, many women lose interest in having fun. But I still felt like I would have to find a much older woman or wait a few years. When things seemed to be back to normal, I still wasn't at my best. And just like you felt like you needed to prove you were a woman, I felt like I needed to prove I was a man. I myself did a lot of walking the streets looking for women to bed, proving, at least in my mind, what a stud I was. I wasn't any more selective than you are. Some women were, Well, let's just say I rode a few city bikes and slept with a lot of them. It went on for a while, and I wasn't as lucky as you. I was woken up by gonorrhea. I also had to confess to my doctor that I had no idea what my partner's names were. We cleared the air, and I began to focus on my behavior during therapy. Next chapter. The almost inevitable confrontation with Diane occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Their relationship was very strong, and Vicky and Dallas were getting along just fine. They still had their own place, but they spent every night together, and it looked like they were going to get married. They went to a club geared towards a more mature crowd. Music was played by a DJ, and interior walls separated the dance floor from the tables, allowing for conversation. Martin and Vicky enjoyed their drinks and chatted about this and that. The evening was going well, so Vicky was puzzled when Martin's smile suddenly disappeared and his eyes looked somewhere past her. She followed his gaze. Martin and Diana saw each other at almost the same time. While Martin's face remained neutral, a grin appeared on Diana's face as she made her way to the table. Even so long after the divorce, Diana had not stopped feeling bitter. She still believed she had done nothing wrong, except that she hadn't been discreet enough. But having her needs met by another man when her husband wasn't up to the task was definitely not on the list of wrong things to do. So when she approached the table, it wasn't her intention to be polite. "Marty, it's so good to see you," Diana said in a voice in which sarcasm was clearly audible. "Diane, Vicky, this is my ex-wife, Diane." "Diane, this is Vicky," Martin said, though he would have preferred not to. "It's nice to meet you, Diana. I've heard a lot about you." "Really?" "And I've heard absolutely nothing about you," Diana replied bitterly. "We're divorced, Diana. Have been for over a year now. My life is no longer your concern. Now, if you don't mind—" Martin left the phrase unanswered, but there was clearly a hint in it that he was suggesting that her ex-wife leave them alone. "Oh, of course, Martin. I hate to intrude on your date. But Vicky, there's something I have to tell you." "And what is that?" Vicky asked, glancing at Martin and then returning her gaze to Diana. "You probably don't need to worry about it. We're divorced because he can't do it anymore." Martin watched Vicky's reaction carefully, and Vicky did her best to suppress a slight giggle. She addressed her next statement to Martin, raising her eyebrows. "Is that true? I don't think you mentioned it." Martin merely shrugged. This was Vicky's game. Diane thought she had them in the palm of her hand, that she had brought discord into Marty's relationship, just as he had done with her and Bill. She was going to enjoy it. However, her happiness was short-lived. "That's good, it's working." "But how is that possible? Did they find the problem? Have they found a cure?" Martin and Vicky were silent, allowing Diana to only get more worried. "Come on, Marty. This problem ruined my marriage. I think I deserve to at least know what was wrong." The smile disappeared from Martin's face. "First of all, Diane, it was your antics that ended our marriage, not my condition. I admit it made things difficult, but you made the choice, not me. Second, you don't deserve a damn thing. We're divorced, and my business is my business alone. Come on, Marty. You can blame my choices all you want, and I can't say you're wrong, but I wouldn't have made those choices if everything was okay." "Okay, Diane. The doctors kept running tests, but they have no idea why he started working again. It just started working. They think the problem from the first accident just takes time to fix. If you had stayed sick with me, as our vows stated, and been patient, we'd still be married." Diana opened her mouth, trying to find something to say. This information shocked her. Martin had already considered pleading guilty to the tree incident, but thought that Diana would claim some sort of credit. She could claim that she was the one who made him regain his ability to function by encouraging him to hit the tree with his cheating, and that he somehow owed her. Best not to go down that path. I can't believe it. God must really hate me." "He just wants to be like everyone else," Martin muttered. "What was that?" asked Diana, flashing her eyes. "Nothing. Nothing at all. Now you know." Would you mind leaving us for the rest of our evening? Diana stood pensive for about 30 seconds, then looked Martin in the eye. You're right, Marty. I'm really sorry. I was wrong to do what I did. I was short-sighted and selfish. I should have been stronger. I ruined a good marriage. I'm sorry. Diana turned and left not only their table, but the club itself. Martin and Vicky watched her until she was out of sight, and they actually felt sorry for her. Martin then turned to Vicky again. Let's dance, my love. Epilogue. Martin and Vicky were married 6 months after the altercation with Diana at the club, and little Ella was born about 9 months later. Wait a minute, you thought. Vicky can't have kids. Well, she can't. Let me explain. Martin and Vicky had only been married for a few months when Martin heard the words every man dreads. We need to talk. Babe. One Sunday morning, they were sitting around the table at breakfast. Vicky's schedule was to make breakfast every Saturday, and Martin did the same on Sundays. Martin had noticed that Vicky had seemed preoccupied and distracted the last couple days, so when she placed a newspaper article in front of him in the middle of breakfast, he wasn't too surprised. What's this, sweetheart? Read it, please. Martin flipped through the article. It said that a guy named Wayne Jessup had been killed by police officers when they responded to a domestic disturbance call. The article was dated about a month earlier and gave some details about the scandalous relationship between the deceased and his much younger girlfriend, who had a 3-month-old baby. It was a tragic story, but it meant nothing to Martin. Okay, I've read it. So? Honey, Wayne Jessup is my ex-husband. Martin realized they'd never really talked about him, except for that short story about why he'd left Vicky for a cashier or something. Wow. Are you okay? How are you feeling? I was in shock, of course. He was never violent when we were together, so it didn't make any sense. And I felt really bad that this young girl had to go through something like that. I agree. But what does it have to do with us? I didn't feel responsible, but I felt, I don't know, involved, I guess. Like I should do something to help. Okay, Martin replied, wondering where this was going. You know the paper sometimes calls on me for research or statistics or whatever, for articles they're working on. So I did a small favor and asked them to contact her on my behalf. As a person and ex-wife, not as a mental health professional. I asked them to tell her that I was Wayne's ex-wife and that I'd be happy to help her, and they gave her my contact information. I assume she called, got in touch with him somehow. Yes, she called. I've talked to her on the phone and even in person a couple times over the last few weeks. And you're only telling me this now? I'm sorry, babe. The first time I met with her in secret because it seemed like the best choice at the time. After that, I felt like I was betraying her trust. So I treated it as a professional matter. I knew I would eventually tell you, and here we are. Okay, what do you need to tell me? I assume this is the girl he left you for. Actually, no. That girl's name was Amy, and she dumped Wayne because he was pressuring her to have a baby, and apparently she didn't want one for a few more years, if at all. The Carly I've been in contact with is the other girl. Okay, so you've been talking to her. Wayne started pushing her too. She wasn't sure she wanted kids either, but she liked the idea of starting a family and thought he really loved her, so she agreed. But as soon as the baby was born, he started being rude and abusive to her. First verbally and then physically. A few times she let it pass, thinking it was just the stress of having a baby, but the last time it got really bad, and she called the police. She figured they'd take him to jail to calm him down and they'd talk the next day. Obviously, that's not what happened. When he found out she had called the police, he started screaming and swearing and pulled a gun out of the dresser. She says she didn't even know he had a gun and hid in the baby's room thinking he was going to use it against her. The cops showed up a couple minutes later, and he went outside to confront them. Carly was still hidden, but could hear everything perfectly. Wayne started telling them to get off his property, that everything was fine, and they had no right to be there. They were trying to talk him out of it when he apparently pulled out a gun because Carly suddenly heard them yelling at him to drop it. Soon she heard gunshots. Carly lay low, not realizing what was going on. She came out when police officers started searching the house and calling for her. No one said anything to her, but she saw a body covered with a sheet outside the door and realized it must be Wayne. How traumatizing that must have been for her. I'm sure she still had feelings for him, and it was very scary to relive that. That's what she said. According to the report, Wayne shot at something and even hit one of the police cars. They returned fire, and that was the end of it. A tragedy. Just tragic, Martin said, not knowing what else to say. How's Carly now? She's fine. She's going to counseling. Not to me since I'm too close, but I referred her to someone. I think she'll be fine. They sat in silence for a couple minutes, mostly just silently contemplating the tragedy that had played out. Martin, there's something else. Somehow I'm not surprised. The thing is, Carly doesn't really want to be a mother. At least not yet. But she's afraid to just hand the baby over to the system. Babies get adopted very quickly, Vicky. She won't be there for long. We both know that, but... Okay, I'm just going to say it. Carly wants me, I mean us, to adopt a baby. Of course I told her I'd have to talk to you about it. But Martin, God, I want this baby so badly. Martin was shocked. He had never expected to be a father again, both because of his age and Vicky's inability to have children. And here was another child, and an infant, possibly ending up on his lap. Vicky filled the silence. I spoke to one of the social workers and a lawyer at the hospital. They said that this kind of planned adoption isn't very common, but it's not uncommon, and it's perfectly legal. Did you talk to other people about it before you talked to me? Martin, I didn't want to talk to you about it if it didn't work out. I wanted to get all the information before I talked to you. And what does Carly want out of this? No money, if that's what you're thinking, although I'd like to help her get back on her feet. After all, she just lost her only source of support. All she wants is to stay in business. If not exactly in Ella's life as Aunt Carly, then at least pictures and news as she grows up. Martin was silent for a long time, going over all of this in his head. He understood every step Vicky had taken along the way, who she'd socialized with, and how she'd worked things out. He just wished he could go through it all with her, support her along the way. How about committing to another 18 years? By the time Ella graduated high school, he'd be in his 60s. Would he have the strength for that? The patience? Even as he asked himself these questions, he knew he would never deny Vicky what she wanted so badly. Martin, talk to me, please. Martin looked into his wife's big, beautiful, deep brown eyes. So, what is the next step in her adoption? That's how Ella became a member of our family. Of course, it wasn't instantaneous. There was a lot of bureaucracy to go through, but eventually the adoption was finalized, and they became a family of 3. 4, if you counted Dallas, who adored her new baby sister. Martin and Vicky helped Carly get a certificate at the local technical college, and she got a job at a dental office. She has started dating a young man who was a patient of hers, and it looks like it may be serious. They see each other a few times a year, and Vicky sends pictures in the meantime. Martin and Vicky are still happy and have no plans to have other children. Vicky is able to take Ella to the hospital daycare when she works and checks in on her several times a day. And Martin somehow finds a way to visit his wife and daughter several times a week.